Hello, everybody. My name is Gordon. I am one of the counselors here at Columbia College. Today, I'll be doing a workshop on the science of stress, a student's guide to stress management. So, there are three broad goals of this workshop. The first one is to understand what exactly stress is. The second one is how do we know if we're feeling stressed? And third and final is what can we do when we are feeling stressed? So before we begin talking about stress, I want you to take a moment to write down what first comes to mind when you hear the word stress. What kind of emotions, what kind of thoughts, and maybe what kind of reactions you might have to this word. Take a moment to write those down or think about those as we continue with this workshop. From a scientific and biological perspective, stress is the body's reaction towards something that we view as a threat. When we see, feel, or think of something threatening, our body may create chemical messengers or what we call hormones. When these hormones are created, when we view something as a threat or stressful, we also might create another hormone called adrenaline. Once adrenaline is pumped into our body, what may end up happening is our hearts might beat faster, our muscles might tense up, our pupils might dilate or get bigger so we can see more. We might end up having our air passages in our lungs expand so we can take in more air. And just in general, what this means is our body can get prepared for immediate action towards something or someone. So let us imagine that you're in Africa one day on a safari trip and you're taking in the beautiful scenery. But as you turn around, you notice that there's this lion eyeing you maybe 200 meters away from you. What do you think you'd be feeling in that moment? What might your first thoughts be? How do you think your body would react when you're seeing this potential threat in front of you? Take a couple moments to just maybe jot down a couple of things that you would feel, think, or how your body would be kind of reacting towards this. So if we take a moment to look at some of the things you might have written down about that exercise with the lion a moment ago, you might have written something like, I might have felt scared in that moment. I might be thinking about how to escape or how to run away from that lion. And I also might be feeling that my heart was racing, my body started tensing up, maybe even started sweating in that moment. So, a common reaction towards that is feeling scared, and understandably so. What a lot of people don't realize is that you are also feeling stress in that moment, and your body's reacting towards that stress because that's a threat. The lion is a very legitimate and genuine threat to your safety. So, there are times when we actually want to feel stress. There is a purpose towards that. Stress and the response that we have towards stress can literally save our lives in certain situations. So, stress can serve as a function, and it's not always negative, even though when we think about stress, we often think of it as a negative thing. But what about when the threat or the stress that we feel isn't something that is outside, like a lion, or something that's external, but maybe something within us or psychological? What about when we feel that stress or threat is something like homework, a test, maybe a project, or maybe even when we think about course planning or thinking about our careers? What if the threat isn't something that's outside of us, but something within us? So, before we can talk about strategies or solutions to when you're feeling stress, we first have to talk about how do we know we are feeling stress. We often see stress come about in these three broad categories on this slide. We may have physical or physiological sensations such as sweating, clenching, tiredness, or upset stomach. We also may feel certain emotions like we might feel anxious, sad, worried, or lonely. We also may experience some changes in our behavior, such as maybe changes in our eating habits, changes in our exercise habits, sleep problems, or turning to substance use. If you're feeling more than a couple of these things, you may very well be feeling stressed, and you might not even know it. Alright, so within this workshop, we've already hit two of our three goals already. We now know what stress is, we can identify when we feel stress, and now probably the most helpful or important part of the presentation is what you can do when you are feeling too stressed out. So let's talk about that now. Stress is probably an all too familiar feeling for students. It's common for students who start to feel stressed or feeling too stressed to invest or add more time into their academics, such as studying for an exam during finals week. This makes sense logically as we only have 24 hours in a day. If we add more time in one aspect or part of our life, we're going to have to neglect or take away from another part of our life. One of the most common aspects of our life that gets neglected as students once we start to feel stressed is exercise. This is problematic for two main reasons. One is that exercise such as going to the gym or playing sports help our body release hormones called endorphins. Endorphins are called the feel-good hormone because they do exactly that. They make us feel good about ourselves. Secondly, exercise reduces the amount of cortisol, a hormone that is produced when we start to feel stressed. When there's more cortisol in our body, we're generally more stressed, and vice versa. So we can see exercise helps fight off stress through these two different methods, increasing production of a hormone called endorphins so we can feel better about ourselves, and reducing the production of another hormone called cortisol, which makes us feel stressed. So it's important for us, even though when we're feeling stressed, to continue exercising as it helps us reduce the amount of stress that we are experiencing. Another strategy to help with stress as a student is to organize and prioritize your upcoming tasks, such as an assignment, paper, or exam. Sometimes we try to keep all these deadlines in our brain, but unfortunately our brain is not as reliable as we may want it to be and is prone to forgetting things at times. A good strategy to make sure that you don't forget something important is to instead make use of something a little more reliable so that we can ensure that we can remember things that are critical. Some people, like myself, like to use something that they already have on them constantly, such as their phone, so that we can make sure we don't forget something important. Organization-based apps like Google Calendar or the variety of to-do list apps can be very helpful in keeping your life organized. The idea is that the better you're able to see what you have in the days and weeks ahead, the better you're able to prepare for the work ahead. Understanding what is ahead of you will allow you to plan more effectively and therefore reduce stress and uncertainty. Speaking of being more organized and prepared, what I want to talk about right now is goal setting. And one way to set goals effectively is through this technique called SMART goals. Now, SMART goals is an acronym, meaning that each letter stands for something specific. So let's go over each of the letters. So we start with the letter S. Now, S refers to it being the goal being specific. The more specific and clear your goal is, the better chance that you have in order to succeed in that goal, in part because you know exactly what you're trying to achieve. So for example, if you would like to receive a higher grade in a exam or a course, that's not very specific because a higher grade is quite subjective. So we need to make it more specific. So that could be saying, for example, you want to get a B plus in the course or 75%. That's very specific, and if it's specific, then you know exactly what you need to achieve that goal. The second is M, which stands for measurable. So now that we have a specific goal of getting, for example, 75% in the course, we need to make sure we can measure our progress to determine whether we're on track or not towards that goal, so we can make adjustments if needed. One way to make sure that your goal is being measured is to look through your course syllabus, because that will tell you what assignments are being taken into account for the course, but also how much it is worth, so you can understand exactly how much you are achieving in that course. The third thing is A, which is achievable. So we need to think about whether our current goal is achievable or not. So in terms of getting that 75% in the course grade, do you have all the necessary resources, such as the required textbooks, course materials? Do you have adequate study materials? Do you also have the time required to dedicate to this goal? Will you need to seek outside support, such as tutors, office hours, or get more personalized instructor help to support my goal? The R stands for relevant or realistic. So, is it realistic for me to get 75% in this course? Is this a subject in which I have little or no background in, and so maybe getting 75% is not as realistic? Is it more realistic for me to get 70% or 60%? Do I have anything else that might get in the way of this goal, such as a job or a volunteer work? The last one is time bound. So this is a little bit easier when we think about student goals, because you already have built-in deadlines. When you think about your tests, your assignments, everything is kind of already set up for you in the course syllabus. And if it's not, your teacher will tell you ahead of time. So you know exactly what things are due and what you need to do in order to prepare for those assignments. Sleep, or a lack of sleep, can contribute to us feeling more stressed, particularly if we are getting less sleep than we normally do. Think back to a time where you either had too little sleep or not enough. You probably felt tired, drowsy. It's probably hard for you to concentrate and focus. This is especially a problem when you need to use a lot of your energy to do something such as studying. What happens when we start to feel stressed about school is that we begin to prioritize study time over sleep. This does make it harder for us to focus the next day because we are running on less sleep. Because we have less sleep, we're less able to concentrate, and we feel more stressed because we're not getting the information into our brain properly. As you can see, this can go around and around, kind of like a cycle. Generally, we recommend that students get anywhere between 7 to 8 hours of sleep on a nightly basis. Sleep also plays a very, very important role in our ability to transfer information that we study during the day so that we remember it the next day. So it's important for us to sleep. A really simple and easy exercise to do in cases where you do feel stress is something called diaphragmatic breathing. It's also known as belly breathing or deep breathing. Um, Breathing is something that's largely automatic for our bodies, meaning that we really don't think consciously about the need to breathe in and breathe out every couple of seconds. That's in part because the way that our body's structured, we have a system that helps us regulate that so that our brain's able to concentrate on other things. However, when we're feeling anxious or stressed, you might have noticed that sometimes our breathing changes. I actually invite you the next time that you are feeling stressed or anxious about something to notice how you're breathing in that moment. You might notice that in that moment your breathing is maybe a little bit more quick and a little bit more shallow. Unfortunately, when we start breathing that way, it makes us feel even more stressed. So when we're able to notice that this is happening in our body, we can react appropriately so that it helps us reduce our levels of stress. So instead of having it be automatic in the way that we breathe, we can kind of manually take control through this exercise, diaphragmatic breathing, and we can regulate our breathing so that we can kind of calm ourselves down. How it works is, if you notice the picture there, is that you inhale, take a slow breath through your nose, breathing into your belly for about 4 to 5 seconds. And then we actually want to hold our breath for a second or two, not too long though. And then we exhale through our mouth for the equal amount of time, about 4 to 5 seconds. And then we want to repeat this exercise for a little bit. I encourage you to try to maybe do that for a couple minutes, anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes. And so this will help a lot of people kind of reduce their feelings of anxiety or stress if they're feeling that in that moment. Another relaxation exercise that you can do when you're feeling stressed is called progressive muscle relaxation. You might remember in the previous slide and some of the other information that I've given you here today is that when we feel stressed, our body reacts in a very specific way. So sometimes when we feel stressed, what ends up happening is our body or our body parts may start to tighten up or tense up. And for a lot of us, sometimes this happens without us actually knowing that this is happening. And because we're unaware of that, it further contributes to our feelings of stress. So what progressive muscle relaxation does is it's a method that teaches us to relax manually through the tensing and then relaxing of your muscles. When we feel stressed, like I mentioned before, we tend sometimes not to notice that we are tensing up certain parts of our body. So we do this by doing deliberate and purposeful actions so that our body can unstress. And then once our body learns to unstress, we will naturally feel a little less stressed. What I've done is I've left a link here about a progressive muscle relaxation exercise that you can find and check out on your own time. The last exercise that I will introduce to you that might be helpful for people who are experiencing high levels of stress is something called mindfulness. So mindfulness is the practice of paying attention of what is going on in the present moment. And there's a very specific emphasis on the present moment, not something that's may happen in the future and not something that has happened in the past, because that's often where our brain goes, but it is about the present and what we are feeling, what we are thinking, and how our body physically is feeling in that moment. The idea here is that it's not necessarily the thoughts or emotions that cause us our discomfort, or in this case, stress, but rather it's our reaction towards these perceived danger that makes it problematic for us. And so, mindfulness is something that, particularly in the East, has already done quite a bit, and there's a lot of practice with that already. And it's only within the recent decade or so that this influence has come to the West, and we've started incorporating this into our well being. And so there are, because of this has existed for so long already, there's actually a lot of different mindfulness exercises that already exist that you can easily access. I've left some links here for you. The first two are more information about a little bit more about mindfulness that, again, you can check out on your own time. And then the last one that says Leaves on a Stream, that's kind of my personal favorite exercise that I like to use to introduce to people who might not know what mindfulness or never really experienced what a mindfulness exercise is. It's a YouTube recording, it's an audio recording. It's about, I believe, 10 to 15 minutes. So I encourage you to give that a shot if you aren't sure what mindfulness is. Another strategy to think about to use if you're feeling too stressed out is to talk about it. Oftentimes, when we're feeling a negative emotion, such as stress, we have the tendency to keep it inside. And often, what happens is that when we keep it inside, it keeps building up to the point where it becomes too much. And that's where the feeling of being overwhelmed often comes from. Often it can be helpful to talk to someone that we know and trust to help us through this difficult situation. This might be a teacher, this might be some of your close friends, it might be some of your family members, or it might even be a counselor who's trained to help people who are feeling stressed. And we can kind of explore some options for you to not feel so stressed out. So, as we wrap up this presentation, I wanted to summarize the key ideas of stress. The first one is that we often think of stress as a negative feeling that we should get rid of. As we talked about, stress has a functional component, meaning that we do want to feel stressed in certain situations because it would be helpful for us. But of course, too much of it can also have a negative effect on us. The second is stress can express itself in several different ways, whether it's through our feelings and emotions, our thoughts, or through our body. It's important to keep in mind that it may not be so obvious that we're feeling stress in that moment, particularly if we're worried about the future or the past. The final point is that we've talked about a couple different strategies that can help reduce symptoms of stress. It's important to keep in mind that each person is unique, meaning that some of these strategies will work more than others. Some of them won't work at all, and that is absolutely okay. If you feel like the strategies discussed today aren't helpful or aren't effective, I encourage you to feel free to speak to one of our counselors about some alternative strategies. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation on stress. If you have any questions about anything discussed here, you can contact the presenter Gordon at the email address listed, or you can also talk to the other two registered clinical counselors at Columbia College, Sophie or Shasha. Their email addresses are listed here as well. Thank you and take care.